So, November 2021, part 2. So we're moving into the 1950s,
Yes.
and in our previous conversation we were discussing your schooling at the Mount,
Yes.
and so maybe if we finish there. So you when did you sort of finish at the Mount?
I finished at the Mount in July 1955 after 5 very happy years there. Didn't get great results, never passed my English language O-level, but I was still accepted at the RGI Leeds General Infirmary to do my nursing. So I went home until the following May when I started my nursing at Leeds.
And what did your parents think of your decision to go into nursing?
My father was not very keen at all. I don't know why, really. I think he was just a bit Victorian. But my mother was very supportive, and he thought I could go to the local hospital, but my mother was all for me going to a teaching hospital. And so I said, oh, which London hospital shall I apply to? And she said, don't push your luck too far. Choose either Newcastle or Leeds. Well, a great friend of mine, Rosie Boyd, was going to Leeds, and so I decided I'd go to Leeds. And I was accepted there. Before on, I think it was I just got 1 O-level, which I think was history, to go and do nursing. Can you imagine that these days?
It's quite interesting, isn't it, that your mother was the one who could, as a woman, could see that, this was an opportunity for you to, and to take.
If you didn't marry, it would be a good career.
And also, it would take you away from your hometown and further afield, be an advent. And she'd obviously been to Switzerland, hadn't she, when she was young? So she probably understood the benefit of, of getting out of your hometown and doing something. Yeah. So did Rosie study nursing as well?
Yes, at the same time.
Yeah.
But Rosie lived in Leeds, and her father was senior lecturer in anatomy at the medical school in Leeds.
Right, okay.
And so he would help us sometime, if we had a sort of, not quite sure what something meant, but Rosie's mother didn't like it, and if we discussed it at a mealtime there, she'd just take her plate and go into another room.
Oh really? She was a bit squeamish.
Yes, she was a bit, I think. But anyway, we started nursing, made some good friends there, had fun.
And where did you live? Did you live in...
I had to live in the nurse's home.
Right, okay.
You had to in those days, I think, for about the first 18 months. And then you needed your parents' written permission for you to go and live out.
Yeah.
That. And so.
And where was the student accommodation? You were at
it was attached to the hospital.
Sorry?
It was attached to the hospital.
And which hospital was it?
The General Infirmary.
The General Infirmary.
LGI.
Yeah. And okay, so you arrived in 1956.
May 56. We were what you call sets. There were 3 sets a year. So our set were always known as May 56.
Yeah.
And there'd be November and February, I think.
And how did you find the first sort of 12 months or so? Did you enjoy it?
Yes, I did. We were in school for the first 6 months, what we call PTS, Preliminary Training School, which was at Roundhay Hall in those days, and we also slept up there. We had lectures, and then 2 afternoons a week we went down to the infirmary, and I was on a women's medical ward, surgical ward, and we did certain things like help make beds, and it was good. There was an old-fashioned sister who was very strict but very fair.
Yeah.
I'll never forget her. She was fine. I also went there with a friend called Anita Holland. I've kept in touch with all this time, and Anita got nervous, and she would drop things a lot. She didn't like the sight of blood.
God, that must have been a struggle.
And I didn't like vomit, so you can imagine she'd stand in for me and I'd stand in for her. And every so often, if she broke something, I'd go and admit to a sister, and sister would just look at me and say, "I know it's Bennett Scott." She wasn't dark. She was a really nice sister.
Yeah.
And so we did that, and then we came down. We sort of did our exams and everything, and then came down to work full time at the infirmary.
So how long was the training?
Oh, 3 years altogether.
Yeah. And you obviously took to it. Your initial belief that you wanted to be a nurse was seen to be a good decision.
Except for one thing, that at the beginning of my second year, I was put into theatre. The first operation, they said just watch, and it was the amputation below knee of a leg. And when that was amputated, they handed me the leg.
Yes, and did you faint, did you say?
No, I didn't faint, but I hated it. Everyone laughed. Anyway, after 2 weeks in theatre, I hated it. I went to matron's office and I said, if you don't move me, I leave. And so they moved me.
Yeah, all right, that's interesting. What a horrible, but I suppose that kind of humour exists in medicine, doesn't it?
Oh yes, I think especially then.
Yeah, well I bet it does now to some degree.
Probably, but you know, it wasn't very nice.
Handing somebody a leg, that's a horrible thing to do.
But we had more exams, I think, at the end of our first year. And we went on our first night duty for 3 months. We did 3 months every year. And I went to the hospital for women, which was very old-fashioned, and we had fires in the middle of the ward, 2 fireplaces.
And how did you do in your sort of exams and things?
Passed them all, yes. I don't think there was any, you know, you either passed or failed. With that. I think most of it is. 32 of us started off in May 56, but in the end I think it was only 16 of us that took our finals 3 years later.
Yeah.
There was a sort of a dropout, I think, particularly after the first year people decided whether they could, you know, stick it or not.
And this was the 1950s, so it was austerity was sort of over. But did you have fun in Leeds? Did you sort of enjoy yourself?
Yeah, well, we were quite restricted while we were in the nurses' home, and we had to be in at by 10 o'clock and things like that. And we all sort of would mutter and joke that we were expected to take care of dying patients and the responsibility. Yeah. And yet they expected us to come back for 10 o'clock at night. Yeah. Didn't.
So what did you do in your sort of free time?
I can't really remember. We just all messed around together. You see, your friends might not have it. We had, at that time, we had split shifts. You either went on at 7:30 and you might work through till 10, and then you'd have 10 o'clock till 2 o'clock off. Then you came back at 2 and work until 9 o'clock at night, or until you'd finished all the work you had to do.
So where would you go for your entertainment? You go to the cinema?
Well, yes, I'd go to the cinema. We could go up to the Students' Union on Saturday night. Sometimes we'd go there.
And that would be dancing and music and...
Yes. But again, we had to be back. I think Saturday they might stretch it till 11. But we were sort of 18, 19-year-olds by then.
Yeah. Yes. So and obviously you made a lot of friends around that time, didn't you? I mean,
yes, you sort of met people. With Rosie living in Leeds, it was a help. I met people like, well, in the end turned out to be my future husband, Peter Radcliffe, but I also knew his brother Martin better, partly because 4 of us, me, Rosie, someone called Rita and Manda, we bought an old car together. It cost £20, £5 each. It was only me that could drive. We got a cover note for a month, insurance, and then we couldn't get any insurance, not surprising. And so we sold the car for, I think it was about £28, to Martin, Peter's brother. And it was called Oswald, this car. And they played around with it a lot, because Martin was a mechanic, you know, he enjoyed that and things. In fact, years and years later, when I was had met Peter and his parents, we talked about that. Peter's father got up, went and got a photograph album and said, "There's the car."
Oh, really?
Yes.
And did you know Peter's parents at that point?
No.
Did you never introduce? No.
No, just that.
Yeah. So you had a good group of pals?
Yes, I enjoyed it. I think times were quiet sometimes, you know, like when you were on night duty, you didn't really get out much.
Yeah. Well, you were obviously very good at nursing.
Was I?
Well, you obviously you got promoted, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
So you graduated in sort of 1959?
Yes, but if you wanted your hospital badge, you had to stay on a year as a staff nurse.
Yeah.
Well, I had worked quite a bit on a male medical ward, and the sister there, Mary Hall, was very nice, and she asked me, this often happened, when I got my finals, would I come back and be a staff nurse on the ward? So I said, yes, I'd really like that. But what she didn't tell me was that after I'd been there a few months, that she was leaving to go into the Queen Alexandra's nursing corps for the army, and that the sister below, Sister Shuttleworth, who I'd worked for before, who was horrible, absolutely horrible, she decided she wanted a change and came up onto that ward.
Yeah.
I couldn't stand it. She'd do mean things, like I got quite friendly with one of the housemen, and he asked me if I'd go to a dinner dance one Saturday night with his parents and his sister and the boyfriend, and I said, yes, I'd like to, and requested it. 2 days before, Sister Shuttleworth came back and said, hard luck, Scott. I want Saturday evening off, so you can't have it, you'll have to stay. Can you imagine that happening these days?
Yeah.
Anyway, David Platt, I think was his name, he came in and said, Sister, you can't do that. And she said, I can, and I will, and she did. Didn't like her. So then, after that, I left, and I went and did midwifery for 6 months. As a pupil midwife in Leeds at Hyde Terrace. And I didn't like it terribly.
Is that in Hyde Park?
Yes. And I didn't terribly enjoy it. So after 6 months, and my friend Rosie, she'd stayed on at the infirmary, we decided we'd have a break from nursing and we'd go off and be nannies in Paris. So we
right.
Used to be a magazine called The Lady, it's still going strong.
Yes, yeah.
But in the back were lots of advertisements for things like au pairs and nannies and things like that.
Yeah.
And so Rosie and I both got jobs in Paris.
God, I'd forgotten about this. So how long did you go to Paris for?
Not very long. I wasn't there no more than 6 months.
But it was an experience.
Yes, it was.
Did you enjoy it?
Some of it. Rosie couldn't stand it, and she came home after about a month.
Oh, did she?
6 weeks, yes. She did. I think she had a really hard time because it was sort of a thing to have an English nanny, especially among the Americans that both Rosie and I worked for.
Okay.
The chap who I worked for, his family, he was air attaché at the embassy.
Oh.
I forget what but Rosie had to wear a uniform. I didn't have to wear a uniform. Mind you, the children I looked
So
after.
what was the family like that you worked with, though?
The Kramers. They were, she was a bit odd, but I found out that she was sort of being psychoanalysed about twice a week for the last, don't know how many years.
Oh my goodness, sounds interesting.
And Pammy, the little girl who was 6, was absolutely awful. She did exactly what she wanted, and she was terrible. The little boy, Bobby, who was about 2, was fine, because he'd always had an English nanny. There was no trouble at all. That Pammy would think nothing of...
So where did you live in Paris? In the centre of Paris?
No, I'm trying to think of the address now. Boulevard Souchet, which was near the Bois du Boulogne.
Oh, right, okay.
It was a really nice area.
And what was it in an apartment or a house?
Oh yes, it was an apartment, a big apartment.
Yeah.
Really big, much bigger than this.
And did you meet any Parisians when you were there, or was it just...
Not really, no. Rosie and I managed to get the same day off each Thursday, and so we'd meet in Paris and go and see the different sites and things. But then she couldn't stand it any longer.
She went home.
So she went home.
So you were then by yourself?
Yes.
Did you make any other friends there?
Not really.
No. This is quite difficult if you're sort of pretty much full time.
Yes. And you just got one day off a week.
But do you have any particular memories of Paris at that time?
Of Paris?
Did people come and visit you or
no? No. So I didn't really stay long. I didn't really enjoy it.
But it was an event. And so then you went back to Leeds.
So then I wrote to Maitre and said, could I come back? Would I have a job at the hospital for women? And she said, well, she hadn't got a vacancy, but she could offer me one on a surgical ward. So I accepted that.
Yeah.
and went back as what we called a charge nurse and had a purple uniform, which was rather nice actually. We liked it. And I worked for Sister Chinovich, who was married to a Pole, and she was lovely. She was really nice. And she ran the ward well, and she taught you things, and this, and I really enjoyed it.
And that would be what, 61?
Yes, yes, I should think it would be by then. And then in about, must have worked on the ward a while, because I think in about 63, 62, 63, matron asked me if I'd be a night sister, and I said no, I wanted to stay where I was. And then, I think then about 6 months later she asked me again. Well, you either had to say yes or leave, sort of thing. So I said yes.
But that was a promotion.
Yes, it was promotion.
You were a sister.
Yes, but you were on nights all the time, remember?
Yeah.
But just before that, I met Dad. I met Richard. Because on the ward I worked, the surgical ward, Anne used to come, as she was known as the Lady Almona, the Lady Almoner.
Yeah, Auntie Anne.
And she came and looked after, if the old patients needed help when they went home and things like that. So I got to know her. She got engaged to someone called Ken Keddy, and an engagement party, and so she asked me and another couple of nurses if we'd like to go. And that's when I said I danced halfway around the sitting room at the Grange, and I was just thinking, oh, what a horrible tie he's wearing. And this voice above me said, would I like to go out to dinner with him one day next week? I said yes. I said yes out of sheer surprise.
What was so horrible about the tie?
It was just all pale. I didn't like it.
Oh, really?
Isn't it funny, remember, because he was quite tall, Dad, and I was never particularly tall, not particularly small, but so I said yes.
Let's talk a little bit about Auntie Anne. So you met her when she was a social worker, sort of, and how long did you know her before the party?
Oh, I should think about a year.
And you were good friends by then?
No, I didn't see a lot of her out of the hospital.
No.
In fact, I don't know that she had many, close friends in Leeds, really, because she'd been away. She'd been away at school, and she'd been to university, and I think, she didn't know an awful lot of people. But she had these two brothers, John and Richard.
Yes.
And
so you went to the Grange to this party, and Dad asked you out on a date. Yeah, and so what were your impressions then, your first impressions, apart from the tie?
Well, I thought he was very nice, but I can remember saying to Francis that I thought he was very nice, and I'd go out with him a few times, and that would be it. Went out with him a few times, and we were with a couple of his friends, and they'd gone to pick up their baby from the parents, and they said, here's the key, let yourselves into the house and have coffee. And so we got in there, and we were on our own, and Richard said, I'm going to marry you one day.
How very presumptuous.
I said, oh, are you? Anyway, the couple came back, nothing more said, but I remember him saying that to me. Anyway, we saw.
And so
then I went on nights, that's right. So I didn't see quite so much of him. And then after I'd known him nearly 2 years.
But he was back in England, wasn't he?
Oh yes, he'd been back in England.
So he was working in Ellendon, living in...
he was living in the bungalow in Almonbury.
So he wouldn't be in Leeds, he wasn't living in Leeds, obviously.
No, he and John were just in the process of moving to this bungalow. And then about that time, my father's sister, Auntie Dora, left me £500, which I then bought my first Mini, much to my father's horror, who thought I ought to put it into the Building Society, start saving.
Yes.
So he wouldn't let me pay all of it. I think it cost about £450, and he said, no, you've got to, out of your weight thing, you've got to find some of the money, and you've got to put so much into the... Well,
probably a good decision, yeah. And then, so So this was in the early 60s, and so you were working nights. And
when I became a night sister, yes. It was quite a good deal, actually, I think, that you worked a week and then you might have off, you did have off Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Then you worked another week, and then you had off Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So it was quite... so
you had chunks of free time, yeah.
Yes, but it wasn't, you see, if you had Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday off, most people didn't have that off. It was the middle of the week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I always used to say that night duty was the best time to save you money, because you didn't feel like going out, and it was the best time to lose weight because you didn't feel like eating a big meal in the middle of the night.
No. Yeah, strange sort of life though, isn't it? Sort of, especially then when everybody had such set routines.
Yeah, it was. But we were a good crowd on nights, you know, and I knew most of them. The sister in charge of us all was very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice indeed. Yeah.
So you were dating Dad, and he would. What would you do? Just go for meals generally, or parties, or?
Yeah, the odd party, mainly out, or go for a walk, or you know, something like that occasionally. Then he asked me to marry him. I used to go over to the bungalow quite a bit.
So how long before he asked you to marry him?
A good year.
Yeah, but a relatively short sort of...
Yeah, I suppose. By today's standards, yes.
And so at that time you met Granny and Grandpa?
Yes.
Obviously John and Anne?
Yes.
And what were your impressions of Granny and Grandpa?
Scared stiff of Granny. She was absolutely perfect.
Was she? Was she?
Yes, and the boys, everyone agreed with her. I once said to her, not when I was engaged, that you all, in the nicest possible way, you always get your own way. And she said to me later, do I really? And I said, yes. I don't mean it unkindly, but it's just, you do.
Yeah.
You know, the boys just...
yes.
Just... the flames come on. No,
they haven't. Should we...
No, it doesn't matter.
Should we keep talking?
Yes, keep talking. Sorry about that. They said... well, Granny she was very sort of particular, and everything was beautifully done. I was asked there, I was engaged to go up on Christmas Day for dinner.
Yeah.
And you can imagine what it looked like. It was lovely, the table and everything.
And what about, but Dad didn't know your friends. He was from a different social circle, or did he?
Well, he didn't know many people because, you know, he'd worked in Africa for so many years. So.
And did he tell you about Africa?
He told me he'd only known each other a short time, that he'd been married before. You know, I was a bit surprised, but, you know, he didn't...
Yeah. Do you want to do that, Mum, and then we can talk again?
Pardon?
Do you want to do that, and then we'll talk? You're sort of interrupting.
Is it on? Is it on? No, it's not. It's just that it's saying 24 degrees.
I know, I'll have to edit this if you keep going.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. It's just I need to either stop or carry on. Okay, so...
He asked me to marry him, and I said yes. And we got engaged in about September, and I was going to get married in the May, which meant that I had to break my contract because I wasn't going to work a full year as a night sister. And when I told Matron this, she happened to know Granny, because Granny had been the head flower lady.
So did you know Granny at the hospital as well? No.
But I bumped into Auntie Sheila once. And Auntie Sheila looked at me and I looked at her. She was lovely, Auntie Sheila, wasn't she? Granny's sister.
Yes, of course.
And she said, oh, Richard's girl, or something like that to me.
All right. So did she do anything at the hospital, or she was just visiting?
She was visiting someone.
Yeah. So Granny was head of flowers.
She sort of organised. I don't know how much work she did.
No.
So that's how she knew Matron.
Yeah. And Auntie Anne was around the hospital quite a lot with obviously her work.
Yeah, but once she got married shortly after I met Richard. See, that was her engagement party. I think she got married in, say the party was in May, And then I think in October of that year, which would be about 63, that she and Ken got married and went to live at Bristol.
Yeah, and did you know Uncle Ken just from the parties, or?
No, I didn't really know him at all.
No.
No. No, our paths didn't really cross in the hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Dad asked you to marry him. You said yes. Do you remember where it was?
When he asked me, I think it was over the garden gate. I think he was taking me back to the flat.
Oh yeah.
And we were doing it, and he just said then sort of, "Oh, you know, can you marry me?" Not very romantic. But he, had some good times together. Yes.
Yeah.
And after I got engaged, we went to Halifax to Irving Hindley's to choose the ring, and I can remember he must have been in before to the jewellers, and he brought out this tray of so many rings, and said, you choose what you'd like, and hand and heart. There was a lovely diamond cluster. Then in the end I chose the one with had a yellow sapphire surrounded by 10 little diamonds.
Yeah.
Which I still wear.
And you were always going to sort of move to Almondbury, or
yes.
Did you talk about where you'd live and things?
Yes, John said he'd move out, and so I could move in with Richard. And so we were married the 2nd of May 1964. And
you got married in Darlington?
Yes, at the Meeting House.
And how was the wedding? It obviously wasn't a sort of typically Church of England.
Well, no, it was sort of a mixture, really, looking back. It sort of went through in a whirl, just like that. Rosie was my maid of honour because she'd been married 2 weeks before me, when I'd been her bridesmaid. And there were, in those days, it was really all your parents' friends, but we were limited to 100, and I was quite a big family, really, because my father kept finding more relatives to ask and things. I don't think Granny approved at all, Granny Wilkinson.
No. Didn't approve because it wasn't the wedding that she'd sort of
yes, it wasn't what she wanted. But I mean, I enjoyed it. Yes, if you enjoyed it, it sort of passed in a whirl like that, really.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
And
then we went to Scotland for our honeymoon.
Oh yes, yeah. Just for a sort of week, or?
Well, we were supposed to go for about, I forget how many days, but we'd foul weather, so we came home a day early. Because there was no point, really.
Yeah.
Into Scotland. Which was nice, happy. Came home, and then after a couple of, well, not long after, about a month, 6 weeks, I began to feel really awful. I felt terrible. Thought this, that and the other, because I was pregnant.
Yeah. And you'd moved to Huddersfield.
Yes.
And how did you find that? Was that
I found it quite difficult. I felt so rotten because I was pregnant.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anyone.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do anything. I was
that must have been quite hard.
It was quite hard, and I think it was hard on Dad as well. And I remember him coming home one day and saying, "You always just say you're tired," and I was, and I thought, I'm never going to say that again to him, whatever. I did. I felt really tired.
That must have been quite a tough start to...
It was. I mean, we both said we wanted a family, that we won't take any precautions because it doesn't matter when it comes. Never thinking that I'd get pregnant straight away.
Yeah.
Thank goodness we didn't try anything before I was married.
Yeah, so obviously it became clear that you were pregnant. I don't suppose they did pregnancy tests as such.
No,
but
I just went to the doctor.
Yeah.
And he sent me to the maternity hospital.
And obviously you both wanted a family, so you're both happy.
Oh yes, we're happy to have it, yes.
And did you continue to have morning sickness, or did that sort of improve?
That sort of improved. Time went on. Then when Emma was born, oh dear, that was another very difficult time.
Well, it must have been. I mean, so you've moved to Huddersfield. You've had morning sickness. You're not feeling very well. Did it improve with the pregnancy? Did you? But you were still. Were you lonely?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think. And then sort of Emma came along, and she was a very cry baby. She cried and cried and cried, and I was exhausted, really.
Do you think you had postnatal depression, or?
I suppose I might have had, in a way, yes, which it wasn't recognised then. But I remember the doctor coming, just sitting on the settee and watching me, and I just, I'm so tired and everything. And he said, I think the best thing you can do is stop feeding the baby and, put her onto a bottle.
Yeah.
And that seemed to satisfy Emma, so she began to sleep more. Oh, it was bliss to go to sleep. I mean, Dad used to come home, and I said, just let me go to sleep. So he was left with the baby, and I was...
Yeah. And was he good in those situations? Was he a good...
Yeah, he never changed a nappy or anything. His fathers didn't in those days.
No.
But, I mean, he loved Emma.
Yes.
Yeah, yes, he did, and things. But and then things began to improve as, she got a bit older and more settled, and I got a bit more settled and everything.
And did you make friends then in sort
of... Not really, but I did know one or two, like Anita.
Yes.
She lived over in Rochdale, and another nurse lived in Ludderden Fort.
Yes.
And we used to sort of meet up every so often, and she'd ask other people who had children, and so slowly it grew. But then when I was pregnant again, expecting Dom, we realised that the bungalow was just going to be too small. So we were a bit sort of house hunting, and we couldn't find anywhere, and then Dad had plans drawn up to put an extra story on our flat roof bungalow. And then we went somewhere, and I saw in the newspaper Martin Nest advertised. I said, listen to this, and he said, far too big, don't want to live in Holywell Green of all places. I said, okay, but we said we'd go and look at anything we thought was suitable. So off we went to look at this house, Martin Nest, and it was lovely, and we both came out of it and both said, I like it. And so he said, got to be sensible, said Dad, got to be sensible, and we'll ask Grandpa to come and have a look at it. So he came in and he said, get it.
Yeah.
So we paid more than we had planned to pay.
Yeah.
I think we only paid about 7,000 for 5-bedroomed house with 5 acres.
Yeah, I mean that's amazing, isn't it? If you think that's like, I mean your mini cost you 500. I'm trying to do a bit of a comparison. It does seem like, I mean obviously house prices have just gone through the roof in comparison, haven't they? But yeah, so it was a lovely sort of house.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It was, and I really enjoyed it. I was expecting Tom. We moved in the April. You were born in the June. And yes, just sort of went from there really. And we couldn't do all the house at once. We didn't have enough furniture from going from a 2-bedroom bungalow, to a 5-bedroomed house. The big sitting room and a morning room and a playroom and a dining room.
Yeah.
We just didn't have the furniture. We just slowly built it up.
Yeah.
Which was good, yeah.
Yeah.
And then 2 years later, David came along. David was a very good baby. We've always laughed about it because David was the one with nice, big, thick, curly hair. And he was a very sort of cuddly little boy. And then 3 years later, Sophie came along. And we all lived happily at Martin Nest. Loved the garden, the moor at the side. We had a dog. Emma eventually got a pony. It seemed ideal until...
Well, let's not jump too far ahead. So by the mid-60s, you had a sort of more children.
Yes, they were born.
Then David, then Sophie. And
65.
And what were you doing then? You obviously you didn't go back to work.
No, I couldn't. I wanted to, but I went back on a refresher course, and and talked it over with Dad. And the only way we decided I could do it was to do nights. And he said, "I'm not having you doing that. No, I just don't want you to do it." Well, it'd be very hard to do something that your husband didn't want you to do.
And also, if you've got children to do nights, would be impossible, really. You'd have to sort of hire a nanny to look after the children.
Well, I did have a...
And there probably wouldn't be a huge amount of difference, would there, between... Yeah.
No. You see, when I was expecting Sophie, I I realised how busy it was going to be in the middle of the summer holidays, and so I advertised for what in those days you called a mother's help, which wasn't really trained. It was sort of English, like equivalent, say, to an au pair. And anyway, I got this girl, Jilly, and I still keep in touch with her. And she was, I think she was very good, but you hear years later that perhaps you weren't all as fond of her as I was.
Oh, I think we were, yeah. No,
I mean, she was only 16, I think, 16 or 17, but she was young enough to play with the children, and she was young enough for me to tell her what to do.
Yeah, no, she was lovely, Jilly, as I recall.
She stayed a year.
Yeah. Oh, was it only a year? But then we saw more of her, obviously, after she...
Yeah,
Did she come back for different periods?
Well, she'd come if I really wanted someone over the weekend or things like that.
And there was another...
Well, in the summer holidays, the first one when I was expecting you, I had a student just for about a month to, look after Emma, really. And then when David was born, I had another one, and she was awful. I got her through someone in the village, and she was their niece, and she walked out one day when I was out and left David, a few months old, in the in the house alone.
Oh dear.
Yes. I felt really sorry for Mrs. Lever, actually, because it was her niece and she'd recommended her.
Oh dear.
And she was full of apologies. Well, it wasn't her fault.
No.
But I said, golly, anything could have happened.
Yeah. But so what was life like then? So you obviously had a growing family, more of a social life?
Yes, I had a bit of a social life. You gradually met people. John had married by that time and lived in the area with Tricia, and she was having children. Yes, Jane Sykes, I can't think, the Crowthers. I still kept in touch with Anita, and she'd moved nearer.
So obviously parents of children at the Gleddings.
Yes, once Emma started at the Gleddings, I used to occasionally have David, Anita's little boy, and she'd occasionally have my children if I wanted to.
I vaguely remember going to their house at one point.
Anita's?
Yeah. And she lived over the border in sort of Lancashire, didn't she?
She lived in Rochdale, but then she went to live at Rishworth.
That's right. That's where it would be. Yeah, that would be it. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It was somewhere there.
And then eventually they moved to Oxenhope Old Hall.
Right, over in Leeds.
Towards Keighley.
Sorry, yeah.
She lived there,
Yeah.
And now, funnily enough, she lives at Harewood.
Yeah.
Always kept in touch with her, vaguely.
So you were quite pally with Auntie Tricia and...
Well, I wasn't so. She was... I wouldn't say I was particularly pally with Auntie Tricia.
But we spent a lot of time...
Well, yes, because
between
of the
two
children.
houses, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Obviously because of that.
And what about work? Were there many sort of wives of... I don't know, I don't suppose that... I mean...
The Wilkinsons?
Yeah, because they didn't really have many wives, did they?
I mean, Dad was known as Mr. Richard and Mr. John and Dr. Gordon and Mr. Trevor and, things like that. It was a bit sort of antiquated. We used to go and see... there was Uncle George. Uncle George died in 1971, before Sophie was born. And he left, I don't know how much. Dad never discussed money with me, he just didn't in those days. Anyway, he was left a lump sum, and so he put it into insurance for school fees.
Yeah.
And bought me a new car.
Very nice.
Yes.
But you used to have dinner parties and entertain, didn't you? Go out fairly regularly for dinner and things like that?
Well, every so often, yes.
I remember, was it Ryella who used to babysit?
Oh, yes. Yes, she did.
With Steve, who was at the cricket club.
From the cricket club,
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So where would you go? Would you go to Leeds and things like that, or just...
No, sort of people nearby.
Yeah.
Crowthers, John and Tricia, Anita.
Yeah. And I remember you used to have dinner parties pretty regularly.
Yes. Well, we did, I think, then, but one point I didn't really have a very big dining room table. And then out of the blue, my godmother left me a lovely chest of drawers and £500. And Dad and I went to the Cotswolds for a few days, and we were in Burford, we were looking around the antique shop, and they had this lovely pine table with lots of things on it, and we said to the lady, is the table for sale? And she said, oh yes, I'll take everything off it and you can, have a good look at it. And so we looked at it, and I said to Dad, what do you think? And he said, well, I like it, but it's up to you because I was buying it. And so I said, yes, we'd have it. So it came up.
You had a dining, yeah. So I remember you people coming and, people, things like smoking, you could tell.
Oh, yes.
And we were sort of often asked to, well, not often, but to come and say good night.
Yes. Well, it was
I suppose it was family, wasn't it? Yeah.
Granny and Grandpa Grandpa liked to come when the first broad beans were ready.
All right, yeah.
And so we'd have ham and broad beans and parsley sauce and things like that. And just occasionally, twice, Dr. Boyd came, Rosie's father.
All right.
He was travelling around, he knew where I was, and he'd knock on the door. I said, oh, come in, and things. Would you like to stay the night? And he said, well, if you can, sort of, yes, rush upstairs and get the bed made up in the spare room and things for him. And of course, one time he came, it just so happened that Granny and Grandpa were coming for dinner that night. And because Granny knew him, so that was a great help.
And you, at this time, you and Granny were, you were more comfortable with
Yes.
Granny, yeah.
I think we got to know each other a lot better. And then I think also after, Dad died, that she was very, very kind to me.
Yeah, she was. And what were your sort of, well, obviously as time went on, you got to know different members of the family. People like Auntie Winnie, Auntie Florrie, and
we used to go and see them, sort of try and go quite regularly to see them in Elland, and Uncle Frank.
And George when he was alive, obviously.
Well, I didn't really see much of George. Occasionally, I remember Richard asking him for dinner with some people, and being of actually no idea, he arrived about 40 minutes early. I said to Dad, look, he's your relative, you go and see him while I get to do the last minute things, that you're cooking and things like that. I couldn't do with that. But otherwise,
well, we were quite sort of self-sufficient, weren't we? We didn't sort of go on great long holidays to, we didn't go on aeroplanes and things, did we?
No.
It was all very much sort of in.
Well, A, we didn't have an awful lot of money, and B, with 4 children, so it was quite. We just used to go. Well, we went to San Zen for 2 nights, for two years running, and then we went to Filey for about 5 nights on
5 years.
Yeah, on the trot.
Yeah, which was good fun. Yeah,
yes.
But it was kind of the norm, wasn't it? Really.
But so enjoyed those. There was Peter and Chinky, of course, we got to know.
Yeah, through the school again, I'm assuming.
Well, no, Peter and Chinky got to know. Dad got to know Peter through work.
Oh, so he was selling bricks to his.
Well,
he
yes,
had a builder's
because he was
merchant.
a builder's merchant at one point, and then he just went over, I think, more or less onto wood.
Yeah, timber. Yeah. Yeah, and Uncle Arthur as well.
Sorry.
Uncle Arthur.
Oh yes, Arthur Lum. He was lovely.
Yeah.
He was the golfing partner of Dad's, really.
And he was a builder's merchant as well.
Yes, he was.
He? Yeah.
I think that's how Dad got to know him. And he was great fun. He was round and jolly and everything. And his wife was tall and thin and cold, Noreen.
Yeah, no, he was a real booming character.
He was lovely, was Arthur.
Yeah.
He was really kind. So he was your godfather, wasn't he?
Yeah, no, I remember going to his works once after Dad died. And he gave me a hard hat.
Oh, did he? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he certainly did his best, and yet he was a lot older, because he was older than Dad anyway, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Yeah.
But,
Yeah. So,
when you were sort of a bit through a teenager, and you weren't really working very hard or something, and didn't he write you a letter, and at the end it sort of put, "Get stuck in, lad."
Yes, he did. It was actually just before he died, I think.
Yes, it was a shame. He got cancer, didn't he, in his glands.
Yeah, but okay, so throughout the sort of, I'm just trying to think what things happened. So obviously, Sophie, the last child, was born in 72, and then I suppose it just seemed to all merge into sort of just
the same routine each
year.
Christmas.
Obviously, we got some ponies and things like that.
Yes.
But anything else stand out?
People used to come to us for Christmas more. Francis and Katie and Robert. We went up to Scotland a couple of times on the train to stay with them, cousins.
Yeah.
Katie and Robert.
Yeah, I mean, we seem to spend a lot of time with cousins.
Yes.
More so, obviously, I suppose, than our children have spent with each.
Yes.
Just because of geography, I suppose.
Yes.
Especially with Sarah, Samuel and Elizabeth, and Katie and Robert. But we did see quite a lot of the Keddies. I was saying, lots of good memories from that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the dreadful year 1978 came along, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that was a huge shock, wasn't it?
That was a real upheaval. It was horrible. But, like everything horrible, you do survive it. You don't think you will at the time, but you do.
Yeah.
And I must say, Granny and Grandpa did the best to help me. Francis and Henry.
Yeah.
And they really were good to me. And Anne and Ken.
Yeah.
Were as well. And they said that they would be your guardians, if anything happened to me. Didn't mean that you had to go and live with them, but they had the say.
Yes.
In what they were. Yes, they were very good. And we went up there to New Year's, didn't we?
No, I was saying to Hamish, I remember going up for those. 78 and 79, 80, yeah.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
It was very good of Anne to have us all. But we stayed in a cottage that belonged to the Mathesons.
Yeah, I remember it well, yeah. It was really cold.
Yes, I'm just going to say that.
It was freezing. But I remember going up in the summer by myself. It must have been, I think, and I went up in 1979. So yeah, we did see quite a lot of them around that time, yeah.
When we all used to get together for the barbecue, and John and Tricia and their children, do you remember you used to have England against Scotland? Because there was you and David and Samuel, and then the three.
Yeah, we used to have those games whenever we got together. But and I remember big games of cricket, and which was always what we used to do, didn't we? Really.
Yes.
I remember when we were very small having those sorts of birthday parties where just big games of cricket and football.
Well, there's photo somewhere, isn't there, of David with a cricket bat and Sophie standing in her Wellingtons frowning.
I think that's at Bowers Hall, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
We had a lovely garden at Martin Ness to play in.
Yeah, it was.
And the fields. And
I mean, it was idyllic really for children. But you found it, I mean, you didn't find it too isolated.
No,
especially when Dad died.
Oh, when Dad died, I did find it a bit. We stayed there a year before I made up my mind. I decided we'd just have to move. A, the expense. B, the upkeep. That's really what gets you with a house like that. So went looking and found a house, found Peel Place. And at the same time, out of the blue, Anita rang me and said, "Do you remember Peter Radcliffe?" And I said, "No, I remember Martin and his brother." And so she said, "Well, he'd like to get in touch." And I said, "Oh, no, I can't. I've got, I'm moving house. Granny Scott had fallen and was in hospital. And I said, "Have all the family coming for Christmas?" "No, nothing much. Well, I'll just leave it." Anyway, about 10 days later, she rang up and she said, "He's still keen to come and meet you." And I said, "Oh, I'll think about it." And I remember telling my friend Sonia. Sonia said to me, "For goodness sake, you get a free meal. Go, take you out." Didn't lead anywhere, but did lead somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's how it all started.
So that was about 1981, was it? When?
Yes, about 1981. It was around Christmas.
Yeah. It's funny, when talking about it, I can remember that night when he first came. I really can. I mean,
I can remember Emma looking out of my bedroom window and saying, "Oh, some headlights have come off the moor." And it turned out that Peter had got there so early to find the place that he just parked to the side. And then when he thought it was time, he switched on his light and oh, they're coming down the drive now.
No, I seem to recall looking out the window in the dining room or something, maybe.
I suppose it was the first time I'd really been out with a man.
Yeah.
Being John and Trish used to ask me to 1 or 2 dances, and they'd rake up some man to. John Barnforth was one.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Another one was the orthopaedic man who'd seen you when you broke your little finger. Or cricket. Didn't you break a finger?
I did, but that was later, I think. That was certainly at Greenland. No, that was later,
yes.
yeah. So, So you moved house just about the same time. And, now we had 2.5 years or so at Greenland.
Yes, 2.5 years in Peter Clay.
And what did you think of the house there?
Of Peel Place? It was okay, it wasn't ideal. Well, it was ideal in some ways, but it did for us. I mean, I was thinking, well, I'm going to be on my own with 4 children. So from that point of view it was, but it was a bit of an ugly house in some ways. And it had that flat bit at the back where you could play your ball games and things, didn't it? And it had a field. Do you remember Mr. Was it Fairbrother? Fairbank.
Yeah, no, very well, yeah.
And he came and said, "I've got 7 sons." And then he said, "Look, you've got your 5 acres, you've got 4 children. If I put my cows in your field, I'll look after the fences, and you can have free milk as long as they're in the fields. And then, pay for it after that." I was fine, you see, he just did deals like that.
Well, obviously he was, little did we know at the time, he'd been a very famous rugby player.
No.
And his sons, obviously,
Peter
became professional.
Peter recognised the name.
Well, yeah, Peter was a rugby league fan, and he played for Leeds. He was very good, yeah. Yeah, he was a nice guy.
Yes, it was things
but
like
I suppose at that point then you were obviously getting more serious with Peter.
He used to come up every other weekend, really.
Yeah.
So
but when did you start to think about, will we move down to Winchester?
Well, he sort of, and he sort of hummed, and in the end I said, "Are you asking me to come to Winchester?" And he said, "Yes." So that's what we. But then you see, there was all the trouble with the will. So although I could move down, I couldn't actually marry him. But John Barnforth said, "Oh well, we'll go to court. It'll be settled in 6 months." It took 2 years to settle.
Right.
And what he said would cost a couple of thousand, cost 12,000 a year, to go to court and everything.
That wasn't very good advice, then, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Not very accurate advice.
No, well, I think that's typical of lawyers, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. And I mean, where did that £12,000 go?
Yeah, I wonder.
Into his own pocket,
well,
no doubt, some of it.
The trust had to have a solicitor, so that was John Barnforth.
Yeah.
I had to have a solicitor. I forget her name now. She was really nice, from a Bradford firm that Sonia told me about. And Emma, because she was 18, she had to have a solicitor as well.
Yeah.
That's how they make the money.
Exactly.
Anyway, they had to go to London at one point and they sort of explained it all, and how, you have 2 years to change your will. Well, it had got beyond that. But there were cases in Australia and New Zealand which they would bring to court to quote that.
God.
And it's quite true. I mean, they said to me, "Do you want to change the will? Your husband's just died. You're not thinking of getting married again, ever."
No, absolutely.
So,
So you moved down to, obviously...
well, I had to sell Peel Place.
Yeah.
And that was nail biting, because the man who wanted it kept coming in and doing things like sweeping the chimney, but wouldn't actually sign for the house. Yeah. The day I moved out was the day he signed.
Yeah.
I don't know what I would have done if he hadn't.
Yeah. And when you thought about moving to Winchester, was that were you sort of a bit nervous about that, or did you sort
I think I looked upon it as an adventure in a way. I didn't know anything about Winchester or Hampshire. I mean, I'd been down once or twice, you know.
And it's the best thing that could have happened, really.
Yes, I think it was.
Taking you away, I suppose, from, you know, what had been obviously quite a difficult time in the end.
And Elland was very narrow-minded. I mean, I did Meals on Wheels with one lady, and she said to me, "And what do the Wilkinsons think of you marrying again?" I thought, bloody cheek.
But I mean, obviously your whole life up until that point had, you know, been married to Dad,
the children,
a sort of
a
really kind of set situation, you know, a house, 4 children, everything quite secure. And then all of a sudden in 1978 that is completely sort of ripped away, isn't it, in one night, in one day. And then you're sort of reeling from that, have to move house.
Yeah. I didn't have to.
And it was quite a dark period as well, wasn't it?
It was quite. Well, I think I was so busy looking after the 4 of you and, you know, trying to comfort you and things. I mean, I used to take, Sophie was the only one going to the Gleddings, and I used to take her every morning, and she'd say to me, "Mummy, if I could just see Daddy once more." I used to drive in sunglasses because I was crying by the time I got to the Gleddings. I said, "Well, sweetheart, you know, it's the one thing you can't have."
Yeah. Well, I suppose we were all struggling in our own way, weren't we?
Yes. Perhaps Sophie was better at being able to say what she wanted, being younger.
Yeah. But it was, so it was quite a difficult time. And then, and obviously Wilkinson's was sold.
Well, no, it wasn't sold. It wasn't sold until about 1983.
Yeah, no, but it was before
Yes.
It's literally as we sort of left, it was finally sold.
Yes, about that time, yes.
But we didn't really have any, I mean, obviously, you know, any sort of things holding us there at that point.
Having what, sorry?
There was nothing keeping us there at that point, really.
No.
So for you, it was obviously it was not just obviously meeting Peter, who, you know, you'd fallen in love with, but also an opportunity for a change and a sort of brighter, I suppose, kind of future, really.
Yeah, I think Emma was old enough to know what she, you know, wanted to do. I think you, when I told you we were moving to Winchester, you just got up and said, "I am not going."
Soon changed my mind, though.
Yeah, you did. And David came and said, he was the one, "Congratulations, Mum," gave me a kiss. And I think Sophie was just sort of, you know, I won't have my friends, I won't have Catherine, but, you know, she got it. Well, if you've really got friends, you keep in touch with them, don't you?
Yes.
And she still, you see, keeps in touch with Catherine.
Yeah.
Mm.
But no, it sort of worked. It worked well, didn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it worked well for you.
Yes, I think in the end it did work well for you, for your children, really.
Oh, I loved it. I mean, I you know, personally, I sort of, it was great. It was like going somewhere foreign, wasn't it?
Yes.
I'm so glad we did it, and I think obviously Emma was a different age, and she settled back in Yorkshire.
Well, she went, remember, to be an au pair.
Yeah.
She hated it. And Rosie, I was telling Rosie, tell her to come home. Well, Sophie, of course, Rosie had been unhappy in Paris.
Yeah.
So she, tell her to come home. And Tricia said, she must stick it out.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, crikey, no. Anyway, she came home and I said, you'll never get a job. Of course, she got the first job and a really good one that she wanted.
Yeah.
So she was out with us for about a year, and then, what was that friend of hers called from Mansfield? Elaine. They decided they'd go and live in Elland and get a small flat. And she, they both worked there for a while. Then Elaine wanted to go back.
And what did you think of Winchester when you got there?
Well, it was quite busy, didn't know anyone. But I was very, very lucky because someone, Pip, someone who lived a few houses down, knocked on my door, and I'd been there about a month, and said, I don't know you and you don't know me, and I know you and you. I'm having a coffee morning for everyone that I know in this area. Would you like to come?
Mm.
So I went and I met Liz Platt.
Yeah.
And she'd just moved down from the Wirral, and she got 4 children vaguely about the same age.
Yeah.
And so, and we each had a dog, so we'd help each other out quite a bit.
Yeah.
Emma used to go and babysit, I think, with the twins who were Sophie's age, and yes, you know, we'd look after each other's dogs if we were going off for the day. And
yeah.
Mm.
I think maybe, should we call a halt to
Yes.
the conversation now, and then we can do another one about things in Winchester and bring us up to date another
Later.
time. Yeah.
Yes, I think that'd be a good idea.
Okay, well thank you very much. That was a very interesting conversation.
Then you think of all the things, little things you've left out. But
Well, we can talk about those next
no.
time.